Welcome back to the Alt Pulse. I'm Michael Sidgmore, co-founder and partner of Broadhaven Ventures and founder of the Alt Goes Mainstream podcast. I'm here with Lawrence Calcano, chairman and CEO of iCapital. We got a lot to discuss today. You were in Asia recently. What was that like?
There's so much activity going on in Asia, really everywhere outside the US, candidly, but it's incredible. There's just a real excitement around giving alternative products to advisors to help, seed their clients. And it's just taken off, the interest in learning about and allocating to alts.
Where do you think a region like Asia is relative to the US, as an example, which has more AUM, when you think about AUM in private markets, more in the US than in Europe than in Asia? So how do you think about where Asia is on its adoption of alts journey?
I think it's still early, but by the way, I think the US is still early as well, right? I mean, you still have a dynamic where, a small number, 25, 30% of the advisors are doing 70% of the business. And so while that's changing and the sort of growth in product design and so forth is helping to facilitate more advisors coming into the asset class, US is still in the early days. And that's true about Asia, it's true about Europe, it's true about Canada, Latin America as well. But we're seeing it really pick up. For iCapital, Asia is our largest market outside the US. I think we're up to about $18 billion in Asia broadly, whereas Europe is about 12. Canada's a little over 7, and Latin America is about 5 billion.
How would you characterize the wealth management market structure there, and characterize in the context of how firms are thinking about adopting private markets? What are the similarities and differences between Asia, Europe, and the US when it comes to the wealth management market structure?
Sure. Well, our go-to-market is certainly different. When we started iCapital, our focus was on the independent wealth market, the RIAs, who were growing their businesses but didn't have access to alternatives. And then we broadly understood the fact that really all the advisory distribution platforms in the industry really needed technology. They didn't all need access, obviously, but they certainly needed technology to create scale and so forth. Outside the US, though, it's quite different. So in Asia, our entry, if you will, is much more private bank focused. Our business has always been about serving advisors. However they choose to practice, that's up to them, whether they want to be, entrepreneurs or employees. Both models have produced, excellent results for clients and for the advisors themselves. We tend not to take a position on that and take a position on how can we best serve advisors in their various work arrangements.
How does the way in which advisors in Asia allocate to alt manifest itself if it's mainly private bank driven?
I don't think it's that different. Like in the US, they're interested in some of the evergreen products. There's still, drawdown business that's being done there. It's very similar to the US in terms of the kinds of products they're interested in. And I would say one of the things that's happening is, if you think about the US market, it really started with the wealthiest clients. And these evergreen products, whether they're in equity, real estate, credit, et cetera, they give an advisor an opportunity to serve all their client base, right? The QPs, QCs, accredited investors, sub-accredited, et cetera. In Asia, there's a much more, let's get to it, and they want to adopt broader product platforms so that they can serve right out of the gate their wealthiest clients as well as their accredited clients.
Two data points come to mind there. One is a recent HSBC survey on the wealth channel in Asia found that clients wanted, one, more alternatives, and two, model or managed portfolios.
Yep.
And then the iCapital survey that you put out recently, 77% of advisors said they were interested in evergreen products.
Yes.
So tying those things together and just connecting some dots, do you think that the advent of evergreen structures is making it much easier for Asian private banks to really work with clients in the way that they want to?
Well, I don't think that's a uniquely Asian phenomenon. I think that's generally true globally. If you think about the private funds, the 3C7 funds, feeders, often those products, restrict the number of accredited investors that can go in them, right? And so they're not applicable for a very large part of an advisor's book if they serve accredited investors. What we do think is true globally is advisors want to be inclusive in terms of the products, right? They want to make the asset class broadly available to their clients. And so as a result of that, they're adopting these evergreen products to be able to have a shelf of products for those accredited clients and sub-accredited clients. And we see that happening globally.
Are there certain products, strategies, certain parts of Asia where GPs are focusing? I kind of like to look at reading the tea leaves of where people are hiring from a distribution perspective. Yeah. Some of those places you went are places that many of the biggest GPs have hired in.
So. 100%. We are too. Like, we opened an office in Tokyo a couple of years ago. We opened an office in Australia late last year, early this year. And GPs are also in those places. There are a number of GPs that are aggressively hiring in those markets, because the truth is that this is still an asset class that is being sold, not bought. So advisors, in many cases, still need education on the asset class. How does it work? How does it fit into a client portfolio? And the GPs who are making those investments in distribution, are able to sit down with the advisors and explain how their products work, how they fit into portfolios. And I think it will be true for years that the most successful GPs will be so in large part because they're making the investment to have feet on the street. Part of what we also see happening, and I think this might bridge some of the transition from products that are sold versus products that are bought, are model portfolios. We launched our first set of models over a year ago because we felt like models would be super important to the next wave of advisors and clients that were entering the asset class. They wanted to know that there was an allocation that met their needs, was suitable for how they want to invest and their risk tolerance, but it could come packaged for them. And that includes packages of alts only, also packages of illiquid and liquid products, which we've also launched with several managers, BlackRock, Goldman, et cetera. But we think that, increasingly, people will want to consume alternatives in the context of a model.
My mind can't help but go to the fact that there's probably some inevitability of which GPs are going to be the most successful in working with wealth. It feels like the firms that have the capability to create evergreen structures will likely be the ones that end up in models, and will likely be the ones that end up being able to work with the largest swaths of the wealth channel. How does this all shake out?
I think it ends directionally with people having significantly larger alts allocations. The road to it, I think, will continue to evolve. You're going to have distribution platforms building custom models, and that's been core to our business model from the beginning, letting our distribution platforms, or GPs, frankly, create custom exposures for a given situation or a given client base, et cetera. So we're seeing that on the registered fund side. We're also seeing GPs themselves build these kinds of products, and we're helping several of them do that as well.
How do you think GPs should be thinking from a strategic perspective, both in terms of how they best distribute product, that could be different based on the size of the GP, as well as differences in distribution across regions?
We're actually now starting to build out distribution. We recently acquired the Citi Alts platform, and one of the elements of that deal is we're going to be assisting and helping with distribution in their field. And we are investing globally in adding distribution capability. For years, our distribution was really focused on, the United States, and now we're adding distribution people globally. I think the need to educate and distribute is still pretty profound, right? When you think about the number of new advisors that are going to enter this asset class over the next 3 to 5 years, and the number of clients they'll bring with them, there's a ton of education needed, and distribution is the continuation of that process.
How much education do you think will happen with the boots on the ground from distribution professionals constantly meeting with advisors, whether that's iCapital's distribution professionals, whether it's a GP's distribution professionals? Is the majority of the education going to come from the boots on the ground element or other aspects of education?
So yes, meaning all of the above, right? You've got to do a lot of different things depending on the client base, the client set, the GP set. You've got to avoid like one size fits all. We've built our business. It's very modular. You can use the pieces you want and don't have to use the pieces you don't want. Well, education falls into that. Some of the education we deliver is online on a learning management system, so advisors can take tests and their home offices can sort of validate their performance and their knowledge. Some of the education will take place with boots on the ground in the field, talking directly with advisors and maybe even with their clients. And we believe you've got to be able to think about education in a multifaceted way, and you have to provide different mechanisms to deliver that. And we recently hired Shanali Bosek. The data that she'll put forth on the industry and how she'll help people think about portfolio construction, products, et cetera, is another element of broad education.
Do you think that with the advent of model portfolios, do you think that private markets distribution for the GP and the way in which the wealth channel decides to select or allocate to private markets is going to become more uniform because models and multi-manager products make it easier? Or do you think it's actually going to become more customized?
That's a great question. There will certainly be a part of the investor population which, there's a set of standard products that might follow strategic alignment, risk tolerance, et cetera, that might be more general. But I think that right now it's important to be able to customize products and product sets to most directly get at what clients are interested in.
What do you think that some of these regions that are a little bit behind the US in terms of adopting private markets, what do you think they'll take from the US in terms of learnings as to how the US wealth channel has thought about and conceptualized allocating to private markets? And what do you think that they'll do a little bit differently?
There's obviously a very different regulatory climate that sits in every different region and country. And I think changes in a regulatory climate may lead to different outcomes. We're here in the US talking about putting alternatives in retirement plans, which I think is a really important sort of next phase. But I think regulations will create differences in allocations over time. And as we continue to invest in our business, one of the biggest areas we invest in is technology. And it's tough because the rate of change in all the structures, how people are investing, different structures people are trying, different packages, different, regulations in different countries and the differences in packages as a result, that requires an incredibly flexible architecture and the ability to do a lot of different things. And so, we are continuing to make significant investments to be able to create that flexibility, to adopt new structures and new capabilities as they come online.
That's actually where I wanted to go next, because you talk often about meeting the client where they are. How do you think about customizing the experience for the client and the advisor based on the region they're in and how they think about interacting with private markets and wealth management more broadly?
We're actually spending a lot of time on personalization. As you know, we not only offer a robust alts access, but we also have an end-to-end structured investments platform, an end-to-end annuities platform, and we've put those all together to create one holistic platform experience for an advisor. And one of the big investments we've made is the ability to personalize it. So when Michael Sidgmore comes to his desktop at whatever bank he's at, and he's using an iCapital platform, he may be only a structured notes user. He may be only an alts user. And so what you see, given whatever your preference is, might be different than my sort of site because of what I invest in, what I see. And then there'll be tags and ways for you to move to the other asset classes that your institution will permit you to invest in or see if you're an advisor. And that will help expand that journey. But we're very focused on, personalizing. And as we continue to grow the platform, that's one of the areas that we're, quite interested in taking the next step on.
When I hear personalization, my mind goes to data. What can you do with all the data that you get to help drive personalization and customization?
we believe that, the compilation of data should be used to help people make better decisions. Like understanding where the flows are, understanding what types of products are being, subscribed to at what rate relative to other products. There's a myriad of things that, we would like to be able to provide, useful information back to the clients. But it's a journey that you have to be incredibly cautious on, and always make sure that you're using data in an appropriate way with a target towards helping the investor advisors better advise their client, and clients make better end decisions.
How do you think the way that private banks think about their evolving alts allocations? Private banks will put this out every year, right? Yeah. They'll survey their clients. A number of banks, UBS, Goldman, did recent family office or wealth management surveys. And they'll show how much clients are allocating to alts. And then they'll also have their recommendations at the home office level. How much do you think that is changing or being recalibrated because of a platform like iCapital, where you see and have the privilege of seeing so much flows across all different channels, across all different geographies? Is that informing what other firms are thinking about going forward, and how they're going to think about their alts allocations in the future? If
you look across the private banks, the CIOs of those organizations have alternative targets anywhere from 15 to 30%. And those have, over the last several years, trended up, not down, right? And we see people trying to create structures to allow more of their clients to start to get on that journey towards whatever the end allocation is for them, let alone the target allocation. All of the big firms and the large RIAs and IBDs, they're all focused on how can we do the best job we can for our clients. One of the ways is to make sure they have a great user experience and they have access to all the products that make sense for them in terms of building portfolios that are enduring and that help them meet their end objectives.
I think GPs would say the same, that they're trying to help advisors deliver the best experience, performance to clients. What advice would you give to GPs as they think about investing in distribution, boots on the ground, working with the wealth channel internationally?
It's not a one-size-fits-all, obviously, as we've said, but there's definitely a need for presence. Firms like iCapital can really help extend your presence and reach a bigger part of the market. But you still have to make some investments to reach those markets, right? But we expect more GPs to be interested in this channel. And for some of them, that may mean the United States and making the investments to really tackle the channel here, and then sort of work progressively into other markets. And for those who are already well established here, I can see them moving outside the US as well.
Feels like we're at this point where both GPs and wealth platforms and wealth managers need to balance both personalization and scale.
That's not unique to this market. As you think about, I remember in the early days of the internet bubble, talking about mass customization, right? And how the best internet platforms were going to be focused on mass customization. And I think that will be true in this space as well, as people want investment ideas, investment products that are exactly what they're looking for, and not having to choose between sort of generalized solutions. And I think it's what the advisors are focused on providing to their clients.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up, because you brought it down to how do you create the right product personalized for people, but that also means boots on the ground.
Totally.
What another great discussion of the Alts Pulse. I'm Michael Sidgmore here with Lawrence Calcano. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.